All right, let's get started. Thanks everyone for joining on time and welcome to the DesignOps Amsterdam meetup. This is our international edition as we're going to invite some friends from outside of our community here to share and contribute. I think it's one of the silver linings we can take from the situation that we're in is that we can sort of expand our community and expand on some of the examples that we're going to hear today. My name's Brendan. I'm the host of the meetup today, so you can direct any logistical questions to me. A couple of quick housekeeping things. We've got 3 presentations this evening, and each one will have a Q&A after the presentation. So you can use the Q&A button that's on the bottom of your Zoom instance to put questions in there. I'll read them to the presenters so that everyone can hear, and they'll answer your questions at the end of their presentation. The chat is open as well, so you're welcome to chat with other attendees about the topics that are being presented. And finally, we are recording. So I know some of you have asked, will you get a recording? And you will get a recording of all of the presentations in the coming days after the meetup. So with that, I think we should jump right in here as a few more people file in. The first topic is really interesting. It's called When Digital Meets Analog. And certainly in this meetup, we haven't covered this topic, but in my experience, it's not talked about at all in terms of when we've got the software and hardware world coming together. And Matteo and Till are going to talk about approaching a design system in this kind of environment. Matteo is VP Experience Designer at Barclays Corporate Banking. He's a UI and UX designer and has 7 years of experience as an IT consultant as well. So his passion for technology has its roots in the arts, and I think you're going to see that come through in the presentation today. He's co-presenting with Till, who leads the design team at Zarvio Digital Farming, which is part of BASF. He's a multidisciplinary designer with a proven track record of building successful web and app projects. So got 2 wonderful presenters, and I'm going to hand it over to Matteo and Till to get us started.
Thank you, Brendan. Nice, super nice to be here. Let's start.
Can you see my screen?
We can.
Looks great, Till.
Okay, perfect.
Kick it off, Matteo.
I'm gonna kick it off, yes. So me and Till have been working together for quite a while in the same company, actually in the same umbrella company, but for 2 different brands. And we were working on similar projects for different markets. And so we're gonna talk about the same things. We were working together. So why we decided to call this talk about madness, because when digital and analog are meeting together, it is starting to be crazy quite quickly because you've got too many different interactions that you have to deal with at the same time. So I don't know, Till, if you can start.
And the other crazy part is, of course, that we talk together and we try to do everything in 25 minutes. So let's go.
Exactly. So Brandon already presented me. So I'm working at the moment as VP of Design at Barclays. But for 4 years, I've been head of design at Maidan Console. And Till.
Yeah, and we met when I was at Music Group 2. I worked for the Beringer branch. We worked on very similar projects under the same umbrella, but actually we were not allowed to share anything, and just found out after we finished our projects how similar our problems were.
Yeah. So let's jump on what the product was. So what a mixing console is quite a beast. I don't know how laggy is this video for you, but it's a hardware and software tool where everything is jumping together. You have to manage the screen that is managing the hardware, and the hardware should be managed by the software, and vice versa. And you've got plenty of level of interactions and a million of parameters you have to control at the same time. Those both the console we were working on were live console, which is a particular set of mixing consoles made for live gigs. So if you think when you're going to listen to, I don't know, you prefer group, I don't know, Iron Maiden or Metallica, etc. There is a sound engineer, at least one, with a big mixing console like this, and the audio you can actually hear is coming through this console. If this console dies, the concert is gone. So luckily, we didn't have live in our hands, like when you're driving an airplane, but the complexity we're managing is very, very similar to a cockpit of an airplane. Go, Theo, with your stuff.
Yeah, and we worked in different branches. So Matteo's console is like the very highest pro level, and you will spend like $70,000 or $100,000 on one of these consoles, and the Red Hot Chili Peppers will drive their tour with it. And I work for Behringer, and this console is $3,000. And but what happened in this market is also very amazing, because now you have consoles that formerly used to cost $100,000. Now through digitalization cost now $3,000 and are very affordable. So he had the very specialized high-level flagship console, and I worked on the successor of the most ever sold console on the market. So, and I was tasked with create the successor, please, for the most successful console ever. We faced similar problems from different angles, very complex machines, and this thing will manage like 15,000 parameters at any one time. So, sorry, next screen.
Yeah, so we started to talk about this talk, and we were crazy after 5 minutes. This is the first board we did in Miro together, and we were connecting ideas together, and in the end, we had to cut out more or less the 99.9% of what we put on the Miro board, as usual happens when you are creating those talks. So I think we can start, because it's already too long, the introduction. Yeah. Go.
So basically, what we are not going to do is we will not show you how to do DesignOps or how to do a design system, but we will share just our story, what we experience, and we will do it in like 4 steps first, and then we will show you our conclusion, what we learned from it. So,
yeah. So when we joined the companies, for both of us, it was like, wow, we've got a new playground for us. We've got all the toys we want. We can play with everything we want, because when you saw those consoles on a desk, and you say, oh, I can play with everything I want. I can create whatever I want. And actually, they gave us the opportunity to create stuff. But quite quickly, you realize that it is not so much a playground. It is quite crazy. You will quickly find that you are facing too many different things together, and actually it is expected that you already know everything about the audio industry, the sound industry, how the sound engineers think, etc., which is absolutely crazy. It's something that no one designer can have in their background, rather than if they are also sound engineers, but it is quite a special mix.
Yes, and you also find out about, of course, the realities of hardware, and that's something that hits you very much, because if you come from like app startups or you do websites and everything, there's problems of like hardware realities, and that will really kick you where it hurts.
Yeah,
that's why.
And that's why you
suddenly
feel like Atos.
Yeah.
You feel like you've got the entire world on your shoulders. You have to deal with too many different things at the same time, and you have to change your mindset, because you can't deal with all those things together. Of course, we had a team. At least for me, it was like with a team. Till at the beginning, didn't have even a design team within. So it is important to realize that you can't afford to have the entire world on your shoulders, don't you feel?
Yeah, you, like in this video, you're close to just throwing everything away, because if you come into a market that's lagging behind in digitalization, and you're tasked with, yeah, just come on and make a digital console now, please, and we want to be like truly digital now, and you're an app guy, right? So do that here. So you come into a company, and the realities of an engineering-driven company is just you not only have to just do a nice UI, but actually there's nothing you're used to, and you have to create all the workflows, all the environment, and just hope that people that have been doing 25 years of engineering just will take part in your first design thinking session or something, because that never existed there. Yeah, you will meet so this is what is expected of you as a designer sometimes when you come into an engineering driven company, and that makes you also a librarian.
You have to start to be like a librarian. You have to study. You can't stop to study. It is important to find references, because with engineers you need to have a reference, otherwise they can't believe what you say. And there are not too many references about interaction between hardware and software. There are a lot of university papers or important papers for big companies like Microsoft, etc. And actually, a lot of them has been released in the past few years. When we started, there were a lot less. The majority of them were related with aerospace or with military aeroplane again, so aerospace as well. And everything you have to create from scratch. You have to create new case study. You have to do a pure research and development work. You have to create new interaction, new way to interact with the console, new way to interact with the hardware. So we, for instance, tested gesture recognition, virtual reality, and stuff like that. And it helped us to create new interactions. But you have to do it like a university student, a university teacher, university professor. You have to being able to create a proper paper with what you are doing. So you have to change your mindset because of that. You can't just go on the web and find it. What is the best practice for that? What is the best practice of those? It doesn't work. And you have to restudy a lot of things.
Yes. And that's why we also talk about like becoming, in some sense, engineers, yeah? Because this reality of a hardware-driven business is that you can't live without the engineers. They're your bread and butter. They're very important, and they have certain mindsets and certain ways of working. And you just can't get in there as a designer and just say, "Let's do our design thinking workshops now, and everything is neat and tidy." So you have to learn first, and then apply also an engineering mindset. And I love engineers, but it's really hard. I see it with a lot of colleagues; they struggle with this engineering mindset, and you always often get these divides between the engineers or programmers, developers, and the designers, where each other just can't talk about. And this is also something we learned the hard way, again, maybe, but also want to give you as our experience. Open yourself up as a designer to the engineering way as well, yeah, and work with them together. And in hardware, this is amplified. Yeah, for example, you can't just do prototyping as for an app, yeah, because you build a product that will have a 5 to 7 year lifespan, and the first time you release it, it has to work. There's no MVP console that doesn't work. Yeah, so
it costs too much.
I'm sorry to it costs too much, and there's merit in also doing waterfall the right way. Yeah, so sometimes it's just the reality of life, and we can't always have our agile dreamland. Yeah, and that's why we're going to talk now about trying to dealing with order and chaos, or bringing order to chaos. So as we always said, when we started out, we were in this order world, yeah. Like we had our tools set up, or we knew what we wanted to do. So you're all used to it. Today you have sexy versioning control with abstract. We didn't have that, by the way, but we wished for it.
I had it.
Yeah, you had it. We had GUI builder tools. We had our workshops to do everything. Yeah, we had this mindset of test, improve, repeat, very agile. in our dreamland, hardware and software is not that different, and they just form a super cool union and no problem. And of course, our mindset is designed for the user. That means tested with the user. Yeah, that's the order, and everybody who does apps and like can attest to that. But and that means you come with all these tools, and you have these words in your mind, and you're just in your little agile dreamland. And then you get hit by chaos, and that means
this is the reality when we started. Actually, when we started, we didn't have any tool. Particularly, we didn't have any versioning tool, but particularly we didn't have any prototyping tools. They existed when we started prototyping tools, of course, but when you've got to deal with hardware and software interactions together, you can't use Actual. You can't use this is one of the most advanced tools that were available at that time. The reason is if you touch a button on the physical surface, something should happen on the screen, and vice versa. If you touch something on the screen, something should happen on the hardware. Or if you move a fader on the console and you change the volume, something should happen on the screen, and vice versa. And this is something you can't realize with an ordinary prototyping tool. So we had to create them from scratch, because those those products were made from scratch. So we had new operating system, new graphic engines, everything was made from scratch. So we didn't have, for instance, what we have in the web environments and the app environments. When you want an animation, you just grab something and the animation works. No, we had to create the animation from scratch within the engineer close to me and say, I want to move with a Bezier curve of that, and we had to create it from scratch. And actually, we went too far away and we had to come back, etc., etc. We had to deal with an engineering waterfall, as Thiel said. It doesn't mean that we were not working agile. It means that the project should. So those projects have got a very, very long lifespan. So I managed that console for more than 4 years, and it's not been released already still. So they takes a lot of time to being created, and you have to deal with that. And we didn't have.
Yeah, and for example, when I arrived, the hardware was already finished for like 1 year. So that's also a reality. Here's your hardware, deal with it.
Yeah, and actually making different prototypes of the hardware is super expensive because you have to create everything and you have to print it out, etc., etc. Hardware and software were not really working together. Actually, they were trying to make stuff that were working together. There were something that were already managed in a way that were working together. But as designers, we need to, and as users particularly, we need to have something that is smoothly connected. And we need to, and a lot of decision has been based on the heritage. So both our companies were in the market, in the console market, and has been in the console market for more than 25, 30 years. So they already had a long knowledge, but that knowledge was about analog mixing consoles. Digital mixing consoles, yes, but where the digital side of it was more for setting up the console, etc., etc. Whether the driving of the console were still heavily hardware based, whether now everything has been overlapped and is working together. And so we had to deal with a lot of different things that we were not ready for at the beginning. Like we play here skeuomorphism, and the skeuomorphism is something that when you are dealing with those kinds of things, you should take in consideration, because sound engineers come to you and say, oh, this hardware, when it touch it, oh, it sounds well. And if it touch something on the screen and it looks too digital, too flat, they said, oh, it doesn't work so well. It doesn't sound well. And actually the sound is the same because the psychology that you have behind is massive. So for instance, we had to create design systems that were applicable to many, many different themes and schemes. So you can see here, we had plugins, and the first one that is on top is the default scheme of the console, and the other three are different plugins, but everything that is there is just a different scheme. Everything else is the same components, the same thing that we created with the developers, and we were able to recreate with different skins, etc., etc., etc. It's super important to being able to do that, and also to being able to manage those things from a design perspective, because you have to being able to test it, to put in the console, to put the images in the console, to test them, etc., etc. This is the hardware we did. It is bigger than me, but in front of the old console is super small. And about the hardware, I leave Thiel to talk about, because it's his turn.
Yeah, so hardware also has a massive impact, of course, on your design systems and your design operations. So, just for example, the design system I had to come up with had to work on several devices and with totally different screen sizes. So the example here is the main touch panel of the console, an auxiliary tiny stage mixer, and your iPhone. And the design system had to cover all these screens and devices. So on the lower one, you see a tiny screen. So it had to work on there too. And also, if you
just to mention, what is important is that the operating system that is driving the console is different from what you have in iOS, etc., etc. And they are working in a completely different way. And the design system should take in consideration all of this.
Yeah. So the controllers are much slower. On one device, I only had 64 colors. You can do no transparency. Maybe everything you want to do, you have to manually program. So you want a cool transition back for time from the developers. And then you have like tiny black and white screens, and all your design system has to be flexible enough to do that. And you have to create systems that are accessible by all teams as well. So this is a really hard reality. Yeah. And then you have to look out for what Hero already said. This has to be at game console speed. Yeah. So if you touch a trigger or something, there can't be any lag. Yeah. This is life saving. So all you have to do is always be close to the hardware, and the hardware dominates everything. And you have to be really close aligned to that. So everything you want to do also costs processing time. And this is a really great experience to see the reality of these live lines, that hardware has to work, and how hardware drives this. And then also you have to plan for different environments, because if you go into a club, it has to look it's dark, it has to still work. And also if you work outside bright sunshine, it has to be flexible enough for that too. Yeah. So what did we learn from that? Because I think we need to start to wrap it up. So maybe we start with some smart words by Matteo this time.
Yeah.
My friend.
Yeah. The first one is everything you learn. Actually, when we started, design operations was still not a word. Design systems were already existing more or less, but they definitely are not a religion. You don't have to copy what the others are doing. You have to adapt it to your project, and you have to learn from the others. We learned in the hardest way, because we didn't have too many examples, but it is super important to learn from the others, but to adapt it to what you have to do.
Yes. And to build on that, that means if you go out there, if you look at the rich materials you have today about DesignOps and also design systems, there's a lot you can see, and there's so many really, really also nice and sexy and just perfect guides. You go to Airbnb and they will show you how they work in a design team, and it's very attractive. But in the reality, this is never how it will turn out. Yeah, and one of the things you should learn as a designer that we learned is you have to be very pragmatic about your solutions. Yeah, and you can't just stay in your dreamland. Sometimes you just have to work stuff away and hammer on it. Yeah, with a hammer and sizzle, and just come to a solution.
Yeah, so there is nothing that is perfect and finished in our world. We already know it, every designer knows it, but when you've got to deal with hardware, this is particularly important to take in mind. And actually, you will never have what you actually imagined in your mind, because you imagine something with a super nice choreography, with amazing animations, shadows, blurring, etc., etc. You can't have it. And the result, the product is the result of the chaos and madness and the order you can take on it, and you were able to take over it. At the same time, what we want to say to everyone, and I think that Theo will stress over it, is it is fun. It is a very nice environment to work with, and products to work with, and is a niche, but is a super interesting one. So not only web and apps exist, there are a lot of other areas where you can do design, and actually this is something that needs designers a lot.
Yeah, and so we couldn't go into the detail we would like to in the 25 minutes we have right now. But we just wanted to show you another world of design, so to say. Yeah, there's a world of design outside of web apps, conversions on a web shop or your apps, and it's super interesting. It's really a paradise for designers because it's yeah, all encompassing. It covers so much that to do that, like to interact with the hardware, is maybe one of the most interesting things you can do, because people will really use your stuff, you know, like really use it. And what we learned from that is that, again, you have to be pragmatic. It will never be finished. It will never be perfect, no matter if it's a hardware or software project. And one of the best skills you can have is like resilience and just a pragmatism to just tackle your problems and hammer away with them and be okay with never being perfect and never being finished, I guess. So this talk has been chaotic. It has been fast. It's just 25 minutes. It's two guys. It's a universe of a topic, basically, like a whole galaxy if you go into hardware. Maybe we can follow up somewhere else, but maybe we can do some Q&A and get some more light into
detailed questions. And actually, I wanted to thank Till a lot, because nobody knows, but Till had a baby 2 days ago, and nevertheless, he's here with me doing the talk. So,
so very tired.
We took the chaos in proper side.
So no sleep, but very happy, and yeah, that's also another universe now I'm in.
Yeah.
Thank you for reminding me, Matteo. Congratulations, Till. Thanks for finding time to join us today. You both certainly don't lack any passion for this topic, so maybe it sparks some interest in some of the attendees today to look at some opportunities in hardware. You talked about becoming an engineer, and so I think you'll hear later in our third talk how designers and engineers work together, and some of the perspectives on that.
I'm super interested because we did it for years and years and years.
Couple of questions for you. So one is that you mentioned that there was very little resources for you, or maybe not a community that was available for you. I know you're in different roles now, but do you have a sense, has that community grown? Are there more resources today for designers who are working in hardware?
There are not so many resources, and the reason is many projects are very private and very secret. If you think of Tesla, or if you think particularly SpaceX now, so nowadays everyone is talking about this digitalization of what we are used to see as hardware. But the studies that Tesla and SpaceX did to realize the Dragon, for instance, are not available. There is not too much around, but in the university world, there is a lot of research related with that now, a lot more than 5 years ago. So you can find a lot more university papers. Again, as I said before, you have to actually read and to go back to university time if you want to approach this kind of job, but it's super interesting.
So the hardware world is actually a world where there's a lot more NDA. Yeah, so like that's really harsh. It's really a burden on just sharing your experiences. Yeah. And so what Matteo did, and I wanted to just quickly say that a lot of stuff actually came from military research. That's crazy. Because that's sometimes just public domain. It actually is, because it is undisclosed. And then you look at airplanes and helicopters and stuff like that, and then think and try to work from there. And then you try, and that is the challenge, to still work in these patterns that your users most probably will be used to. Yeah. So you look at, how can I do an airplane but make it an iPhone?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
that's what I mean. This is also, yeah, it's that's why it's such a great thing to do, but it's also super hard.
No, that's pretty interesting though, is trying to kind of look for those examples, get creative in almost how you're looking for them. We've got a couple of more questions that have come in here. One from Yasith, who asks, on this project, were there any industrial designers in the company? And if so, did they collaborate with the two of you?
Yeah, so I can go ahead already, because I can't answer in detail. Again, it's NDA. Yes, but there was a very good industrial designer who of the hardware design for the for the console, and I can say that in my role as UX designer, I worked with him. I didn't create the console, but we consulted about how to lay it out, how to make the printed communication on the console, and also about maybe feedback between the screen and the touch screen and the console. But that's about it. Everything else then came from the software, from the GUI. I had to go back though to engineers and industrial designers to just make sure that what I did with the touchscreen and my priorities were the right ones. So for example, me, I had a much smaller screen than Matteo. So I divided up the console in two phases. I said, you will use the tinier screen mostly when you set up stuff. And then when you run live, hardware has to be first. So I had these paradigms, and I said, screen is too small to run everything, but it's super useful when you set up. And during live, it switches to just becoming like an information display because it's too small. And the hardware is number one player then. And that I worked with the industrial designers and the engineers just to iron that out. Yeah.
Yeah. For us, it was the opposite, because we had a big screen. So the software is driving everything. Also, you can drive the entire live from just the screen if you want. The problem is that the mindset of the design engineer is to use the hardware many times. It is super interesting that you saw sound engineers went and test the console during demos time, etc. And they started playing with the hardware, and after a while they were playing also with the software because they had to set up stuff, etc. They started to drive a lot more from the touch screen. That was super interesting for us. Yes, the mindset for them is to drive stuff from the hardware, and everything should be related. If you touch something on the hardware, it should be reflected on the software. It is mandatory, and vice versa as well. And for that, communication with engineers is massively important.
One tiny little comment still, maybe just because for the end. Good point, because what we did was we integrated, and that was also consulting with the industrial designers and the engineer, we integrated touch-sensitive buttons, like turn knobs, encoders we call it. So that was super interesting because it was something that entered from the touchscreen world. So now you just touch without even turning, and then something on the screen happens. It knows what button your finger is on. And that was super interesting, and it's really, really cute because you could now do stuff. So you touch a button and a section enlarges on the screen now to show that parameter larger. And then you turn the knob and you see the number much larger now. Exactly. And that was, for example, something new we came up with industrial design, yes.
Wonderful. Great question, Yasser. So thank you again, Matteo and Till. I'm going to introduce our next talk from Basil. So if you want to start sharing your screen, Basil, and getting set up there. This one you'll like, Matteo, because we're moving into the financial services world. So Basil works at ClearScore, and he's going to talk about how he built up his DesignOps function. He's set up and leading the function. at ClearScore, and they're a fintech company in the credit scoring arena. And before taking on this challenge, he worked in product and proposition management, focusing on digital transformation projects across the financial sector. So welcome, Basil. Thank you for joining us tonight from London, and please take it away.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And I don't know how to follow up on such a crazy hardware software combination with Metallica in mind. So I'll try my best. I'll bring people back to the digital world, unfortunately. But today I will talk to you about my journey in setting up a DesignOps function at ClearScore. And as Brandon said, we are based in London. We are a fintech and credit scoring and education around credit scoring, and it's a marketplace as well in one product. But before I dive into the craziness, I wanted, if I can, So I wanted just for you to take maybe a couple of seconds and just reflect on the sort of feeling that you might get if you're handed a blank canvas to work on. For me, it was a combination of excitement, but fear at the same time. And today I'll talk to you about this journey in setting up this DesignOps function, starting from a blank canvas. And I'll talk about the history a bit, and I'll share some of my learnings, which interestingly, there is a lot of similarities with what the guys has shared in terms of learnings, you will see. But before we get into that, I want to take you back to May 2019, when Frank, our design director, came to me with a question whether I would be interested in setting up a DesignOps function. So I had to ask him, after I did a bit of Googling what the heck is DesignOps at that point, I had to go and ask him, what did he think a DesignOps mission would look like at ClearScore? And this was his answer. So he said, I'll know it when I see it. Fast forward to January 2020, and this is again Frank talking about setting up a design team from scratch at our DesignOps site, where he said, if I have to do this again, I would make sure to have a design operations manager next to me from the get-go. And honestly, when he said that, I was surprised. I mean, don't get me wrong. I knew that I was doing a good job, considering where we started and my background. But I was surprised mainly because I didn't know that I've done enough to make him speak so strongly about DesignOps in such a short time. And it hasn't been a straightforward journey, and it's not complete by any means. But like the guy said, nothing is perfect, so it's never finished. But today I'll share what I've learned so far and how I came about these learnings. But I know probably by now some of you have already thought, he's your boss, he's your sponsor, he's the one who called for you to set up this function. So he kind of been preaching to the converted in that sense. And I couldn't agree more. I mean, he was the person who asked for me to set up this function. So I didn't have to do much of convincing there. But my challenge, I thought it was a bit different. I mean, but was it? I don't know. So we'll see. I remember last year when I was at the DesignOps conference, I was outside having a coffee when I approached one of the speakers, someone I actually think quite highly of. And I was telling him excitedly that I'm about to set up this function. And his first question to me in a very sort of like classic American fashion, but why you? And I froze because honestly, I didn't have the answer. I didn't know what would that be. But I knew why we needed DesignOps function. It's sort of like a straightforward answer. It was the structure of the business and the scale of it. So to tell you a bit more about that, ClearScore is a mid-sized business, 5 years of trading, 14 million users, profit making, all good. But what I think it makes it different, it's as a fintech, design has always accounted for about 10% of the workforce, which I think it's quite unique for this industry. The design team is distributed across delivery squads, and the design team grew between 2016 and 2019 by 600%. That's in less than 3 years. And that drove the need for DesignOps. But back to the why me question. I'm not a designer, or at least not in the conventional way of it. I've joined ClearScore just a couple of months before that request came from Frank. And I was doing another role which was new to them, which was a project manager. And I was sort of new to the whole tech industry. Now take that with a director who handed me a blank canvas to build on when I asked him, what do you want me to do? And probably any rational person will tell you, this is a recipe for disaster. But honestly, this is where I believe combining vulnerability with your ability and willingness to unlearn creates a superpower. So what I did at the beginning, after asking Google what DesignOps is, I actually came clean to the team. I told them where I came from, what sort of skills I have, and what I think I can add to this team. But more importantly, I asked them for help. Now, some might associate vulnerability with discomfort, with being exposed, with weakness maybe. I think vulnerability is a power. It is actually a fuel for creativity. And Brené Brown spent 12 years researching vulnerability. She has an amazing set of talks and books, highly recommended to read and watch. And she agrees with that. But nonetheless, I totally understand that it can be challenging and it is difficult sometimes to embrace in certain scenarios or businesses or teams. I was lucky to have an environment where vulnerability is actually celebrated, where you can actually be open and you can say, I don't have the answers. You can tell people I don't know how to do it, and for them yet to chip in and help. So what I began doing at the beginning of my journey, I set myself on a mission to learn. I looked for information internally, and I started talking to people externally to try to put myself on the right track, all while being vulnerable, pushing myself to unlearn what I think is right and embrace the ambiguity that comes with that unlearning process. So it's very important at the beginning of a mission like this is to actually force yourself to unlearn and to really listen to people carefully and actively. And when I started the role of DesignOps manager, I began actively listening to people through different platforms, through one-to-ones, surveys, and workshops. We had an idea, me and the design director, what we wanted out of this function. We wanted better efficiency. We wanted to have a structure for scalability, but also maintain clarity and quality. We wanted to give designers more time to design, obviously. We didn't know how to do it, nor did we know that it is actually the right thing to do. So I started by digging deeper into understanding the pain point to see if our hypothesis is correct. And I did that by workshops from sort of like process mapping workshops, activity affinity mapping workshop. But most importantly, I did about 10 sessions, all based on the DesignOps canvas. Kudos to David Malouf and his colleagues. But what is very important to remember in these scenarios that you don't copy and paste these workshops. You have to tweak them and change them according to the team, according to the purpose of them, and according to the dynamics that you have. And that's what I did. So let me tell you a bit what I mean by that. So if we take the canvas as an example, you may have seen this before. It's well-known DesignOps canvas. They usually recommend you to print it in sort of like an A3 level paper and sit down with people and fill these questions. I think there's about 32 questions on it. But I like mind games. So I found it very interesting to actually run this in a sort of like a question by question workshop style. It took longer, certainly, but I can definitely tell you that it unlocked a lot of insight and learnings that otherwise I think it would have been missed. To give you an example, if you look at the stakeholders section, it asks questions that if you give this paper to the person to fill these questions, they will probably scan through these questions and start answering according to what they think is the right answer, rather than what actually the situation is. So when I took the team through this and talking about their partners, it unlocked a different way of designers thinking about their partners. So when we talked about them discovering who the valuable partners are what success is to their partners, and what actually their partners have obstacles between them and their success. And then eventually I gave them a question saying, thinking about all of this, what are you actually doing to unlock your partners for them to achieve their success, forgetting about what success is to you. So you as a designer, your strongest ability is a problem solver. Are you solving their problem in achieving their success? And that unlocked a different sort of like universe of how they think about their partners and their relationship with them. Now, obviously, this took a lot of time and effort. Was it all, well spent time? And I think, yeah. I mean, all these activities and effort that we put in building the right foundation is paying off now during these crazy times, unprecedented times that we found ourselves in. So having done all the work that I did on processes, tools, and plays, i.e. ceremonies, the team managed to actually shift their gears so smoothly into the new ways of working, into remote working. They managed to change their focus with the minimal friction. And more importantly, we managed to design a whole new ritual or ceremony or play, depends on what you call it, that actually answered the business needs now and the new realities that the team has found themselves facing in a matter of a week or so. So all of that thanks to the foundation that was put in the first place at the beginning. So what I would say is, unlearning is a big part of this journey, and you have to learn again, and you have to spend time with the team through whatever means you have, actively listening to them and let them teach you what their pain points are, and then go and change any mission or framework that you have in mind accordingly. You have to embrace that lack of knowledge and be vulnerable about it, and then you have to always unlearn what you think and always remember that the minute you think you're right about something, you probably killed your creativity towards that problem. So in my opinion, if you ask any ops person, design ops or any ops for that matter, what they love about their job, they're most likely to tell you it is helping others, actually, solving problems for other people, not for themselves. It gives a sort of like feeling of ecstasy and excitement, and it's very tempting. And if you don't stop yourself, you end up, doing anything and everything. Probably sounds familiar to some of you, and myself, obviously. So you'll end up helping people and solving their problems and establishing, frameworks and optimizing processes. And you go down into this rabbit hole of doing everything and anything, and maybe forgetting to look slightly ahead and slightly higher. And it is actually a mistake that I did. So despite knowing that I needed to, I did not account for measuring impact to keep track of the impact while actually trying to do actions to improve efficiency, to increase time to design. And I was taken away by also all the other business problems and did not manage to put that in place in the right time. And trust me, doing it later was tricky and painful. So I urge you to try always to go against your nature as a problem solver and as a firefighter, as an ops person, and try to think ahead as a strategist, not just at the beginning of setting up a function or at the beginning of a big project. We probably need to do that on a weekly basis. Every week, we should stop and think, what am I doing as a firefighter? And what should I be doing as a strategist to give DesignOps the futuristic perspective it deserves? To enable me to do that, for instance, going back to the canvas, what I did is I did it in two folds. So I did one round of these sessions where I set the scene to the team to think about the questions in the now scenario. Then I did it later where I set up a fictional scenario to the team saying, we are 12 to 18 months ahead, the team has doubled, now let's answer these questions with that perspective in mind. And that helped me to kind of like start imagining a bridge between the now and 12 to 18 months to give me a bit of futuristic perspective for my initiatives and projects. So, we talked about measuring impact, and it is a hot topic, not just for DesignOps, but for the whole of the design discipline and its ecosystem. But what I've learned actually is data and metrics can be found almost everywhere. You just need to look around. They're hidden in plain sight. You need to start looking around yourself first, and then expand that circle into your discipline, and then into within your company, and then go outwards to others and speak to others and learn from them what they're using and get inspired. So the minute I started thinking that way, I actually started seeing metrics in probably sometimes in the most unexpected ways, to be honest. So when I talk about looking into your own stuff, I'm talking about thinking of questions like, do you know how many design rituals or plays do you do, your team does? What is the engagement rate with these plays in your playbook? Does the team find them, useful as sessions? So what I did at the beginning of my job is I created a playbook for the business. And the minute that we launched that playbook, people started coming to me and asking me how to do it, who should I invite, can you help me facilitate this, blah, 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 which was very good and interesting engagement. But then I started noticing that actually not everyone is engaging with my lovely playbook at the same level. So I decided to put my stalker hat on and see who's doing what and when, and started putting sort of like a log of who's running these sessions and who's participating into them. And to my surprise, I actually came upon something that I was not looking for. I noticed that we've done quite a lot of critiques, for instance. In a matter of fact, by when I did that exercise, it was 4 months old, the playbook. And we actually did, in 4 months, we did more critique than a whole year, which is, an amazing achievement, great metric, which, to be honest, I was not looking for. I was actually just trying to understand why people are not using my lovely playbook, which is a great, metric that I stumbled upon. So from there, I moved from stalking to actually talking to people and started thinking slightly outside of my box and thinking who has, work in a similar function, that it is centralized, it has an indirect and intangible impact on other people, and how do they actually manage to measure their success? And within our company, I learned that people are using data from a company-wide survey called the Engagement Survey. So I started looking into that. And I noticed that it had a lot of, metrics that A, could be useful as metrics, but B, could also help me thinking slightly ahead or shed a light into areas that I need to focus on. And then I thought maybe I should go slightly backwards and see if there is any trend in these sort of like metrics. I mean, voila. In fact, after the setting up of the DesignOps function, the satisfaction rate in the design team has improved from 80s to 100%, and it was maintained on that level. We measured 33% improvement in alignment within the design team and with the rest of the business. 29% improvement was measured in enablement. This is when we talk about tools and processes and having access to these and knowing how to use them. And in terms of clarity on remits and responsibilities of the design team, so team structure and line management and, this sort of like matrix between function and teams, delivery teams. But also we've learned that recognition is lacking behind of these metrics. So it gave me a sort of like a hint, where should I go next? But very similar to what the guys were saying, every business is unique. So I would say definitely always look out for frameworks and metrics that the others use, but don't try to copy them, because trust me, it'll be very frustrating when you find out that you can't actually take these metrics and apply them for yourself, because simply you have different ways of working, or you have different data sets that will help you create your own. So yes, definitely look out, but learn and get inspired, not copy and paste. So this is one of the learnings that I want to leave you with is, learn from others, but don't just copy and paste them. Look around yourself first, and then start talking to people, and you definitely will find a metric or several metrics that will help you understand your performance and your business performance and your team performance. Always try to keep focusing, and remember that you should not be just a firefighter. You should think as a strategist when it comes to ops and design in general. And always and learn from the beginning and be open and vulnerable about it. And as I said, always remember, the minute you think you've got something right, you probably killed your creativity. And that's it from me today. I hope I wasn't too quick, but happy to answer any questions.
No, it was wonderful, Basil. Thank you very much. Your last lesson, for it's disappointing to those who are going to watch the video after and try to copy and paste some of the canvases you showed. That's not the direction you're giving. First question for you, since you sort of started as the solo person in the DesignOps functions, who was next? Who did you team up with next, or who got brought onto your team as the next role?
Very interesting. Interestingly, after you start working as a DesignOps person, you kind of like hired as a design resource. But very, very shortly, you find that DesignOps is actually way more centralized than being only in the design team. Your work is always spanning across to tech and product, marketing, and people. These are specifically the people that I found around me quite a lot. Either solving processes between these functions, or actually working on onboarding with the people team, or on career progression, or team satisfaction. So these alliances, I think, were very, very powerful. And I found myself actually building that connection and trust with, for instance, the people team, coincidentally, before actually maintaining that within my design team, just because it happened that we onboarded 4 designers the day I took that role. And I found myself actually taking care of these 4 designers, and hence opened that sort of like channel with the PPP team, what we call PPP. It's the people, performance, and some other people.
Oh, so you jumped right in. You had a good-sized team right from the beginning. Another question is around some of the metrics. So I think you showed a creative approach into coming up with some metrics that A, you could find, and B, that were relevant to you. But how did the rest of the business react to those, and what I'll call sort of maybe less traditional or less recognized types of ways to measure?
It's always a mix of metrics, B, mix of feelings. So you have to look into something more tangible. So, using tools like Jira to kind of like measure time to delivery, or I also explored some timing tools to understand where the work is going and how much time is spent in doing stuff. But the fact is, this this discipline is very new. So the fact that you can actually show any metrics of improvement, people will be happy about it. They can understand that you actually have seen that. And when the business looks at, let's say, satisfaction rate, it's very important that you retain these people, because you're spending a lot of money in hiring and training them. So when they see your satisfaction rate is improving, and it's ahead of other functions, specifically because you have a DesignOps function, it's a valuable metric that eventually will bring money back, because you're not actually replacing resources quite often.
Fantastic, well said. And we have maybe we'll do one more for you, which is somebody in the audience is a non-designer, like you were when you started out, and they wanted to know, how did you establish credibility among the designers from that position?
Brilliant question, to be honest. So it is one of the struggles, if you're not coming from the design background, it's one of the struggles is actually building that trust with the team. So I think what helped me a lot is that element of vulnerability. So the minute that you put yourself in front of people and you being open, and it's like what I call being naked in front of people, and actually showing that genuine human being who would want to learn, who would want to listen to people, doing the first couple of surveys, and then feeding back these surveys into the leadership, and then taking actions and feeding it back to the team start building that trust automatically. And there is a section in my talk that I took off for time saving, which is specifically talks about this element of two phases in the life of DesignOps. One, which is you're building trust, and suddenly there is a switch that gets turned on, and you have that flow of requests, and your mission changed to how do I manage these, and how do I actually stay on top of my requests, because you should be happy and you should celebrate these requests. But yeah, definitely it is more about picking up certain individuals and building that rapport with them and making them your allied. I was lucky to work with the design team as a project manager to begin with. So I knew about 4 people in the team who knew me very closely from working on that project. And that built some sort of like, emotional connection between us. So they became my advocates within the design team without me having to make too much an effort. So maybe starting with a tiny bit of a project with them, or with small group that will then become your evangelist within a big design team.
That's great. And it sounds like you've been doing a great job with the ClearScore team so far. And thank you again, Basil, for taking the time and sharing with everybody today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
All right, we will be moving into our final presentation, last but not least. Trish or Umar, if you could get ready and share your screen. I'll introduce your talk, and I'm pretty sure a word you made up, called DesignOps. And this is the intersection of dev and design ops. And so we have presenter 1, which is Trish, who is a design technologist with 10 years of experience connecting design, technology, and the business. And we have Umar, who is a solutions architect. And Umar's been working for 15 years in this role and has worked across embedded and cloud solutions and uses his expertise to guide teams to their highest potential. So we have somebody from each of the sides, if you will, and looking for some fireworks during this one. So please take it away, Trish and Umar.
Thanks, Brendan. As Brendan said, I'm Trish, and this is my friend Umar, and we both work at Rangle. Brendan, you did a wonderful introduction, so I don't know if I need to go into much more detail. So let's just keep going. But I will say that me and Umar met each other at Rangle working on our first project at the company together on a medium-sized medical device app for Android phones. And when we both joined the team together, we realized that if we weren't purposeful about how we were working together, the default was naturally going to be waterfall for a few very specific reasons. From the design side, design was never really taught to be agile. So my background is actually in graphic design. I have a print degree, so this kind of comes with its own set of ideologies and paradigms with how we're taught to work. We're kind of taught that we have to be very perfect before we reach any kind of production level, because once you reach production, it becomes very costly to fix mistakes. And we need to solve for all problems of today, tomorrow, and in the future, because once we put it out in the world, it's pretty much done.
And then I'm going to speak for from the development side, Agile is pretty well suited for developers to be able to move fast. You can make them change. You can make changes, and there's no real punishment for making mistakes. But what we saw was there's a disconnect between how dev and design works, to where a lot of it just seems sort of like a handoff. The designs are done, and then the devs pick it up, and that didn't really seem to make sense in sort of the world that Trish and I were operating in, because we need to be moving fast and seamless, and we also need to understand what each other are, what we're doing on the same team. And so there's something about the system and the rules that we're using that Trish and I decided just needed to change, because it didn't fit the way that we wanted it to.
Yeah. Like I said, consider just from a design perspective with how we are trained up in the domain. You could call that a system. So if we want to understand the deepest malfunctions of systems, then we need to pay attention to the rules. So this is a whole way of thinking and approaching really anything. especially operations, because operations are essentially just another type of system. And so if it's another type of system, then we should be purposeful about what kind of outcomes we want to see emerge from the system. And the way outcomes emerge is you have rules. So some of the outcomes we were operationalizing for on our team when we first started working together was we specified some values that were important to us. So cross-functionality between all domains in design, technology, and business, highly performant, self-organizing teams with minimal resources was something we were really passionate about. Highly predictable delivery velocities and organizational transparency was also something we were really passionate about. But these are very big overarching outcomes. And when you start to dig in, the rules that would support these outcomes kind of relate to these three words of communication, collaboration, and co-creation. And again, these, without any unpacking of what these words are in practice, they remain very aspirational and very large. So what we want to do today is kind of unpack these a little bit and talk about what these mean in practice for us, what that meant for us on this specific project. So at Rangle, we solve very different size problems. For the sake of this talk and for the sake of time, I'm going to actually breeze through this just a little bit. We could, if you want more information about the size of projects and what you do, definitely let us know. We can send you this document. But anything from a small size problem to a medium size problem to a large size problem will have very different ways of working. And kind of goes back to the theme of this meetup today, where you have to kind of just design what works for you. But the problem that me and Umer were working on together kind of looked like this, where it was, the project started off as an unmet need in the market for an app that allows you to control a medical device from your phone. And so that medical device was an insulin pump. And so the app we were creating was to control the insulin pump from your phone. And so that was the need, to build and design a functional app. Our team was about 14 people at its most, and which had a very clear bit of a division between like a core track of technology, of developers and quality assurance. And then there was a second track that was more enablement focused, of producers like Scrum Masters, product managers, and designers. And we kind of use this approach of semi-swarmed problem solving. So we'll go into what that is a little bit more now. So how to communicate. What is your team approach? So when we say communicate, we don't mean Slack or any ways of transferring messages. We don't mean email. We mean, like, what is the plan of attack for solving problems? Because your plan of attack will heavily influence how your team makes decisions, distributes information, and solves problem between disciplines. So you saw at the smaller end of the spectrum there, you have this swarmed approach where, because there's at its most less than 5 people on a team, context is super high. You're able to share information in real time. Everyone is aligned on what's being done, and they're all solving different aspects of the same problem at the same time. But as teams grow, that becomes very difficult, because I think everyone has experience with 20 people in a room and how little gets done. So you have to come up with this more tiered approach, where there's time buffer in between the flow of artifacts that kind of lead to this tiered approach. And what that looks like is something like this. This is what me and Umer used on our teams, where I was the design enablement track, and I was about roughly 1 week ahead of the technology track. And my artifacts would inform what they were working on, even though we were still coming together to solve the problem. So even though the execution was tiered, it was allowing for a staggered flow of work so that everyone had time to think about how we were going to help each other. And we'll go into this a little bit more. So how to collaborate, what are your rituals? So the rituals that supported this communication style, this approach, were a number of different events. So what we mean by rituals are meetings, touch points, or norms that are dedicated to enabling collaboration. So as the size of your team grows, you need to have these like touch points, these rituals in place that you can rely on, that's going to make sure the flow of information is purposeful and people are staying aligned without having to think about it. So some of our rituals included internal team reviews, PO gut checks, ceremonies and demos, and the flow of design tickets from design into development on Jira. So a little bit of a visual representation of about what that kind of look like would be something like this. So if you're imagining that this chart is kind of like a Jira board where the labels at the top are swim lanes, where you take a ticket and you move it from to do to in progress to your first weekly internal team review in design. The whole team is coming together early on, way early on in a sprint, to look at the work that's been done in design. So I would come to the team with very half-baked thoughts and ideas on purpose because I wanted the rest of the team to pick it apart. I didn't want to spend a lot of time buttoning everything up so that everyone could feel like they own the solution together. And like oftentimes I didn't have to solve all the problems by myself because I had a really intelligent team that was able to solve problems with me. And by the time that we kind of formed a unified solution language, we'd have another touch point with our product owner. And then our product owner was able to do the same thing, feel involved in the solutioning, feel involved in the process. And in the meantime, we were socializing the work as well. So they had an opportunity to contribute and pick apart any problems they saw way early on. And by the time we got to the end of the week and my ticket moved into done, it was time for ceremonies or a demo. And by this time, very little feedback would be coming in as for the design because the work had been heavily socialized already. Everyone was speaking the same language. We were all in agreement that this was the best thing to be done because we were all felt responsible for the solution. And then I would pass, that ticket would go off and turn into a development ticket.
Yeah, so then I'm going to speak for the tech track. But before I talk about that, I want to go back to the design track and add a point that we weren't really even like tearing apart the designs. Like once we started to understand how this insulin pump really worked, we could inform Trish on like what actual capabilities there were that she wasn't aware of, or what might be a little bit harder that she would need to tweak. And I think there's a lot, like for example, like we would know the type of data that we're getting from it. It'd be like, hey, there's all these other fields that you can use, and you can use that in your designs. So that was really like super helpful to be able to like quickly provide feedback. But going back to like the tech track, this is pretty common within developers, right? Like this flow of in progress, review, QA testing done. But what we had was we wanted Trish to look at the work in progress before the developers did it. Because if there's going to be a UI or UX change, she could make it before we have the developers look at the code. And what we enabled her to do, and this is part of like the cross functionality, is that she had access to our Git repo, and she had the ability to check out the development branch, run it locally, and load it up on a mobile device, just entirely on her own. And so what we did was we didn't have it be part of like, there's developer onboarding, it's just team member onboarding. Anybody on the team, product manager, Scrum Master could run the development branch locally. And then the rest of it was just all pretty standard. We didn't have to introduce like any new tooling. This was just part of like GitLab, so Trish could add her review into GitLab. Feedback would go there, and then on Jira, we just had to add a few extra fields to enable these two different tracks to work for us.
Yeah, so this is a good representation of that semi-swarmed approach that we were talking about earlier. So you can see that this is the staggering I was talking about, where even so by semi-swarm, I mean we're solving problems together at specific times, and it's the flow of the artifact itself that is staggered in time. And so let's keep going and talk about that a little bit more. So when we say how to co-create, we mean how does your work flow? Co-creation is kind of like the culminating task that pulls everything together. It pulls in the communication, the collaboration to make something tangible. And some co-creation questions could look like, what does the team need to provide each other with today so that they can anticipate tomorrow? What kind of artifacts can be parallelized? And how does continuous improvement continue to happen over time? So you have to be purposeful for these things and talk to each other about these things in order to understand that what you're doing is providing each other with value. So this is a graphic to represent kind of our workflow, where I would be ahead again from the tech core team by sometimes 2 weeks at least, where that would grow or shrink depending on if things came up. But if I was 2 weeks ahead of them, I'd have 2 weeks to identify high-level user journeys on a whiteboard with the team, then produce them in low-fidelity wireframes for key flows and happy paths. And this is the artifact that I now have. And by the time that's ready, I can start feeding that into development where they're just kind of following my lead over time of work that they've already been a part of solutioning. So I will keep going. They will take some of my artifacts as I continue to flush them out. So if I've done wireframes for happy paths, then I can go ahead and continue to flesh out wireframes for edge cases and unhappy paths. And then start to apply high fidelity visual design to key screens and components, because essentially we wanted to prove out first that what we were building could work before we started worrying about things like typography, colors, and spacing. And then once that became a thing we could focus on, it gave me a chance to componentize the front end and identify foundational style elements and start creating more of a design system around the app itself, which brought us to another phase of the project where I could work with stakeholders and refine previous work over time and continue on that continuous improvement path. So the outcomes. By working this way, we learned a few things and we were pretty proud to achieve a few things. But essentially it came down to something that is really actually nice to see through this entire meetup is like this, we're starting to talk more about behaviors that are required to work with people, because this is the next frontier of like achievement, is when we are patient and calm and open to learn through the experiences of others, innovation will make a jump to light speed. I'll let you take this one, Umar.
Okay, so the outcomes, like we accomplished like what we wanted, right? Like Trish and developers like became much more tightly integrated. But then we started to like see outcomes which we weren't really anticipating, like positive outcomes. So part of like being able to bring Trish in was that cross-functional teams like sort of break the barriers. But then what we saw happening was that developers started to understand UX a lot better, and they could go back and speak to Trish about specific like UX or UI changes that need to be made. At the same time, we also broke down the barrier between like development and design, because everybody had access to the repo, everybody could check out branches. We'd see that QA would start making bug fixes in the repo. Like, could just make a PR. Like they didn't have to wait for a developer to do it. Everybody was sort of like just moving as quickly as we needed it to. And then because it was like broken down cross-functional, everybody became like very well organized, where we all understood like how to sort of like get the ceremonies prepared, how to do the refinement for our upcoming sprints, how to get some of like the materials ready that we needed to present to the product owners. And there's a point that they're like, we effectively didn't need to have a delivery manager, because the whole team sort of knew how to manage themselves. And then also like we were able to like unblock each other. So our stand-ups became very pointed, and we all understood pretty much what was going on. And then since we had a great understanding of like the product, and we knew what Trish was developing towards, our estimates became like extremely accurate, where we could predictably know what we were able to pick up and maintain within our like 1 week sprints, and we were able to deliver on time. And because we had so many ways of engaging with each other, we never saw these like sort of problems where like, well, we're stuck, we don't know what to do, well, we need to go and get in a meeting. We were just like rapidly just moving and delivering on functionality, and if a problem came up, we'd swarm and fix it. And I don't think this was some particular outcome that Trish and I were looking for, but it just sort of naturally happened.
Yep. So all models are wrong, but some are useful. Like it's again, super refreshing, this whole meetup, because we've all been kind of practicing the same thing, which is to say, this worked for us, but you have to be purposeful with your own solutions and design them for yourself, because there is no one model fits all. Like, this is a heavily dependent context on what we were working with. Like, it's actually really fascinating to see an example that was hardware and software, because hardware becomes very difficult to iterate on using agile practices, whereas when we were working with purely software, this was something we could do quite easily, and this is what worked for us for this context. So ultimately, you're going to just need to experiment and find what works for your team. Constantly be very skeptical with yourself and ask what outcomes you want to see and how to enable them. And if you're not seeing the outcomes you want, then you need to change the rules and play with them and be purposeful about stating what your values are on a project, what it is you want to see. Aim towards what you want and not what you don't want. Because we must learn through the experiences of others and bring together a wide diversity of perspectives to understand if the system is enabling the best outcomes we want to see on our teams. Good luck. I wish you all the best, and please let us know if you have any questions or something you want to talk more about this about.
Excellent. Thank you, Trish and Umer. And I think that last piece of advice was particularly important, because I think sometimes when we get frustrated of not seeing the outcomes we want, we try to choose a new outcome. And maybe we need to look at, or could potentially look at the rules as a way to get to that outcome that we know we want to reach. We've got a question here from Yasit that says, how did the UX research take place? Did you do it in a third track, or was it part of the design track?
So I was the only UX and UI designer on this project, and ultimately I just asked questions as we went along. We partnered with our client, who provided us with some initial user research that they had already done. But then throughout the process, there were different milestones for doing like risk assessments and more user testing to see what was resonating and what was not. I just kept doing it throughout the project. I have a friend who had a insulin medical device that was hooked up to his body, and he was very kind to give me his time, and I interviewed him at length to make sure that I was doing these quick gut checks with an actual user, and that was not me or anyone else, to see if what we were doing was valuable.
Okay. And as a follow-up, if you didn't have the research there from a client or otherwise, and you had to run sort of a full design research process, would you put that on a third track, or would that sit within the framework that you showed in the presentation?
Oh, so that's a good question. It depends. Some of the larger teams I've been on, it has been a separate track. But to speak from experience of something I'm doing again right now, where UX research is just something I do that's a part of the process. And as it pertains to like task tracking and Jira and Agile, I look at it as something I'm looking to learn, and here's what I'm going to do to learn it. And once I find out the answers I'm looking for in a way that is time boxed, then I can move on. So larger projects, yes, it's a separate track. Smaller projects, not really.
Okay, and maybe time for one more question. Sort of the framework that you showed in how design was working with development really looked like it worked well in your project, but how did the team members react when you started and when you were going to go into this process? Was it so simple to get everyone on board?
I'll let Umer, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, as far as I remember, it felt sort of, I don't remember like having a lot of like difficulty getting people involved, but we also were just doing it organically, right? Like Trish and I were just doing what we thought worked. And since these are 1 week sprints, we had like really quick feedback loops. Going back, like I don't remember us having any sort of like real issues or obstacles or anything coming up within the team.
No, not necessarily. So, I mean, sometimes if if ego started to get in the way, we would honestly demonstrate as a team. We would behavior model why it was important to loop everyone in, or why it was important to not be non-alarmist, why it was important to allow people to make mistakes safely. So when friction kind of did arise, we made sure that it was psychologically safe to fail and talk about in retros every week.
Wonderful. That's been a pretty common theme throughout the talks today. Okay.
Yes.
So that's all the time we have for today. So I want to thank again Matteo and Till, Basil, Omar, Trish for providing the presentations. I had a question in the group today about when we might be meeting again face to face, and unfortunately I don't have an answer for you. We're not going to do that until it's perfectly safe and comfortable to do so. Having said that, we'll probably take the summer off as people start to go on their holidays, and it can be hard to get the group together. So if we're looking at a next meetup in September, then we'll sort of play it by ear in terms of how we might host that, but I'll post all those details in the meetup group. That's also where you're going to find the recording in the next day or two as we pull it down here and post it up. And feel free to connect with any of the presenters on LinkedIn to ask any follow-up questions, or you can ask me how to get in touch. So thank you everyone for joining us this evening or this afternoon, and have a wonderful rest of the week.